something feels off. What once looked like one of the most unfiltered, hilarious, and unbreakable duos in the influencer world just vanished. No big fallout, no screaming match, just a quiet, awkward goodbye that left more questions than answers. Tana Mongeau and Brooke Schofield's podcast canceled was supposed to be chaos, chemistry, and controversy. But lately, it felt more like two strangers trying to survive a contract. Now the podcast is over. And while the internet has been flooded with statements, interviews, and TikToks, trying to paint the breakup as just business, not everyone's buying it. Whispers are getting louder that they secretly hated each other, that the tension was real, that the podcast became toxic behind the scenes, that Brooke wasn't as innocent as she seemed. And Tana, maybe she was done playing nice. So what actually happened behind the mic? Because once you start connecting the dots between the shade, the tweets, the off-camera drama, and the not-so-subtle unfollows, the truth starts to look a lot darker than anyone expected. This isn't just the end of a podcast. It's the unraveling of a friendship, a brand, and possibly the final chapter in one of the internet's most chaotic influencer eras. Let's begin. When the announcement dropped that Canceled was ending, it landed like a whisper, not a bang. No drama, no explosive statement. Just a casual, carefully worded explanation from Tana Mongeau and Brooke Schofield saying they were moving on to new chapters in their lives. That their creative visions were shifting, that this decision was about growth. And maybe on paper, it sounded mature. But anyone who'd watched the show, even casually, could feel it. This wasn't evolution, this was escape. Tana claimed they would finish out their contract, posting episodes until the end of the year. She said they might revisit the podcast one day, never say never. But the energy behind her words didn't sound hopeful, it sounded done. Brooke barely said anything. No long farewell, no emotional goodbye post. Just silence and then clips of her quietly sitting through episodes. Barely engaging, just waiting for it all to be over. It didn't take long for fans to start questioning everything. Was this really about growing apart? Or was it the final product of months of resentment, creative tension, and quiet bitterness? Tana insisted there was no bad blood. I love Brooke, don't twist that. But the more she said it, the more people didn't believe it. Because when someone feels the need to clarify that often, it usually means something's already cracked. People started dissecting everything. Instagram likes, unfollows, passive-aggressive captions, the noticeable lack of behind-the-scenes content. Even the podcast itself had changed. No more real moments, no deep conversations. Just surface-level stories, awkward laughs, and two people who looked more like coworkers than best friends. It felt cold, controlled, like two people fulfilling a commitment, not sharing a passion. And maybe the most telling sign, neither of them tried to save it. There was no last-ditch rebrand, no new guest format, no season 3 reset. They didn't even pretend to be sad, because maybe they weren't. Maybe the end of Canceled wasn't the end of a friendship, it was the release from a partnership they had both outgrown. But instead of admitting that directly, they gave the internet a soft lie wrapped in vague positivity. And the fans, they weren't buying it. You don't need a breakup announcement to know when something's wrong, sometimes you just feel it. And in the case of Canceled, fans started feeling it months before anyone said a word. At first, it was subtle. Brooke and Tana still laughed, still gossiped, still dropped wild stories. But underneath the surface, the cracks were forming. Longtime listeners noticed the tone was shifting. The conversations that once flowed effortlessly started to feel off. Stories didn't land the same, the chemistry was fading. And then it became impossible to ignore. Tana would start telling a chaotic, wild story, and instead of hyping it up, Brooke would cut her off, change the subject, or shift the focus onto herself. Brooke would try to be vulnerable, and Tana would roll her eyes, make a joke, or pivot to something superficial. It wasn't just bad timing or miscommunication, it was disconnection. Even the body language changed. The way they sat further apart, the way their eyes barely met, the forced laughter, the tension behind every smile. And it wasn't just once or twice, it was consistent. Clips from recent episodes began circulating on TikTok with captions like, "Are they even friends anymore?" And Brooke looks so over it. Some fans tried to defend them. Maybe they're just tired, maybe it's burnout. But deep down, people knew this wasn't temporary. This was the beginning of the end. And maybe the most telling sign, they stopped defending each other. No more sweet captions, no more behind-the-scenes moments, no more "I love her so much" on Instagram stories. Because when a friendship dies, it doesn't scream, it goes quiet. And canceled went silent long before it officially ended. What happens when fans stop rooting for you and start watching you fall? That's exactly what happened to Brooke and Tana. Once the cracks started showing, the internet did what it always does, it picked a side. And Tana was the obvious favorite. She was the icon, the chaos, the brand. People saw her as the backbone of canceled, the one who brought the energy, the stories, the drama. Brooke, on the other hand, started getting framed as the anchor, dragging the vibe down, making things uncomfortable, acting too serious, too controlling, too self-centered. And then came BFFs, the podcast moment that changed everything. Brianna Chicken Fry and Josh Richards discussed canceled. And Brianna didn't hold back, it just feels like they hate each other. Josh agreed, the tension, the awkwardness, the lack of chemistry. And with that short, raw moment, everything the fans had been whispering was suddenly validated. Now it wasn't just speculation, it was gospel. Comment sections exploded. Finally, someone said it. Brooke ruined the show. She was always jealous of Tana. Clips from old episodes were pulled apart frame by frame. Moments where they disagreed were now labeled fights. Moments where they laughed were dismissed as fake. Tana became the hero. Brooke became the villain. And the worst part, there was no winning move for Brooke. If she clapped back, she was bitter. If she stayed silent, she was guilty. If she cried, she was manipulative. If she smiled, she was fake. That's the thing about the internet. Once it turns on you, it doesn't want an apology, it wants a collapse. And the collapse was just beginning. Just when the noise around her engagement started to fade, the past came knocking. Old tweets, screenshots, receipts. Suddenly, Brooke Schofield wasn't just the mean co-host or the girl with the controversial fiancé. She was now being labeled something far more damaging, a racist. Years-old tweets resurfaced, offensive jokes, slurs, ignorant comments, and it didn't take long before Cancel Brooke started trending again. Tana Mongeau, quick to distance herself, posted a vague but firm video. "We don't stand for that, not on this show, not ever." And just like that, whatever defense Brooke had left collapsed. In a last-ditch attempt to take control of the narrative, Brooke appeared on Isaac Rel's podcast. She didn't dodge or hide. She looked directly into the camera and said, "I was ashamed of those tweets long before anyone found them. I knew they existed. I had to live with them." But the internet isn't built for forgiveness. Some praised her for facing it head-on. Others saw it as damage control. And when Isaac, the host, gave her space to explain, he got attacked too. Why give her a platform? She's only sorry because she got caught. Brooke admitted she didn't even feel safe enough to take time off after the scandal because she was under contract and had bills. "I had to work, I was afraid, but it was my job." In a single podcast episode, she tried to reclaim her voice, but all it did was remind the internet of every reason they wanted to silence her in the first place. By the time the final episodes of Canceled aired, it felt less like a podcast and more like a post-mortem. The energy was gone, the banter dead. Then came the breaking point, Jeff FM. On an episode that felt engineered to start a fire, Jeff Wittick and his crew didn't just throw shade, they dropped bombs. It turned into a full-on roast of Brooke Schofield, and it got personal and ugly. "Brooke, I don't know, she's racist, she's dating a pedo." The fans ruined their show, and she let it happen. No one bleeped it, it was recorded, it was uploaded. It spread like wildfire. Clips exploded on TikTok and X. Some laughed, some gasped, but most agreed. What made it worse? Brooke didn't respond. Tana didn't defend her. This wasn't two friends parting ways, this was reputation demolition. It wasn't about podcast ratings anymore, it was about how far a brand can fall when the audience decides to pull the plug. So where does this all leave us? Tana Mongeau is already in her next chapter. She's teasing new content, new collabs, and a fresh image. She's not mourning the end of Canceled, she's capitalizing on it. But Brooke is quiet. Her posts are more curated, her comment section's filtered. She's not gone, but she's definitely pulling back. And that silence says everything. Because maybe canceled wasn't just the name of the podcast, maybe it was prophecy. The friendship that started with matching outfits and inside jokes ended in PR statements and unfollows. The realness that fans loved turned into performance. So what was it really? A friendship? A business deal? Or just another content pipeline feeding the machine until it stopped printing views? And maybe this is the cautionary tale, that in the influencer world, nothing is what it seems, and that some of the deepest cuts don't come from haters, they come from your co-host. Because behind every perfect thumbnail, there's a DM you'll never see. Behind every laughing clip, there's a fight you'll never hear. And behind every "we're still best friends," there's a silence screaming the opposite. So when the next influencer duo launches a podcast, drops merch, and promises their ride or die, and just remember this, not everything that sounds real survives reality.